So, okay, so today we are going to do something a little bit different. We're only going to do about an hour, maybe a little bit more since we're starting late. Sorry, it's been a really busy night. And since we've been really engaged, especially starting with Dan Leach's class on Shelley and Prometheus, what was it, 4 weeks ago or so? We were able to shift gears, jump into a firsthand reading over the course of 3 sessions of Shelley's famous essay, A Defense of Poetry, written in 1819. And in the course of each reading, I think I had said a few words to the effect that, now we're actually going to read a poem by Shelley. And each time we didn't actually get around to reading a Shelley poem. I was originally thinking maybe the Mask of Anarchy. But that's not really the height of Shelley's performance and creative powers. So Dave has done a lot of work on Shelley, has advanced poetic faculty, which is rare in our post-structural day and age of abstract thinking, or at least deconstructionist thinking. I shouldn't even say abstract. So he's got a website here, which he'll say a little bit about, called the Chained Muse, which, Dave, I'd like you to just introduce your Chained Muse, your new lyre, and which is trying to revive a certain spirit of poetry, which has been long forgotten. And then we'll just jump right into a reading of Shelley's Hymn to Intellectual Beauty. And Dave will just guide us through Shelley's mind a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, people should chime in as they see fit. Okay, do you see a screen share right now?
Or? Yeah, I see New Lyre. We see New Lyre magazine.
So I figure I'd just do that. Okay, so you just want to...
Well, say a little bit about New Lyre, Chained Muse. What's the spirit of that? And then maybe just set the stage into Shelley's mind a little bit more. This particular poem, why did you select this poem, sort of thing?
Right. Okay, so I mean, this simple, I guess everybody can see it now. So this is the Chained Muse, our little sanctum of poetry, fountain of beauty. And it's basically, I like to think about it as a sanctum refuge for those, seeking beauty, truth, and goodness when it comes to the question of composition and just exploring, what that really means. What does classical composition mean, whether in music or art? There's all these labels today. There's all these isms, nominalism, imagism, modernism, postmodernism. You can go on and on. It gets Dadaism. It gets a bit dizzying. And so the counterpoint to that, I like to think about it in terms of timelessness. Classical art as really a question of timelessness. So it doesn't really matter what age you're in, or better said, every age has its own idiosyncrasies and particularities. Like something people talk about modernism in contemporary verse. So it's like I took the metro at, County Street, chewing my Popeye's gum. I'm making things up here, but it's considered like, oh, we're dealing with our current age. And that you have to do that in any age you do that, right? If we read Dante, I mean, medieval battles and popes and church politics, it's not exactly the same thing today. And yet all the more that attests to its timelessness, because it's still just as relevant. If anything, its beauty and timelessness becomes even more obvious because all those contemporary elements of that age are no longer, or we live in a very different world. And yet what somebody like a Dante or a Shakespeare is exploring is more relevant than ever, arguably, in our own 21st century. So that's always the idea, exploring what does it mean to create something timeless in our own modern age, and that some things don't change, right? And I guess this is what we're going to look at with Shelley. There are those things which change, and there are eternal things, and there are those things which are always changing. And I think that the key to great art is being able to combine these two, right? To, as Schiller said, you know, the artist is a citizen of his age, but he shouldn't be its pupil, right? He should be like a fierce Agamemnon coming to sort of cleanse it. And so, yeah, what does that mean today? What needs to be cleansed is a strong word, but you know, what are the problems and challenges of our age, and how do we address that from the highest standpoint, i.e., timelessness? What Kwan often refers to, I guess you could say, kairos, right? A great piece of art has a quality of kairos to it. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A channel between chronos and tempos, between time and timelessness.
Absolutely. And easier said than done, right? Because anybody can sort of write about their own personal feelings and experiences, which is often what a lot of poetry and literature is today, right? It's like, oh, wow, that's so brave. You know, like you're talking about your daddy issues, or, you know, your mom got run over by a car when you were 5. I mean, those are extreme cases, but it's all the more they're like, oh, wow, that's so compelling. But okay, that's personal. That's, you know, those are your personal, that's your lived experience, right? That's the word that's used today. But I think for the true timeless artist, immortal artist, it's how do you render these things, or your own personal experiences, how do you elevate them to a timeless standard? And so Shelley is a great example, right? Because he was looking at the ancient Greeks, which he very much admired, and was seeking to explore those themes in his own age. Hence the class that Dan gave on Prometheus Unbound, right? Where Shelley really very explicitly and consciously is revisiting these timeless themes, right? And giving them, adding new degrees of meaning and nuance to it. And I guess the last thing I would say is, yeah, that's the thing about a timeless theme. If we think about these Greek myths, you know, we were talking when we went out for supper a few days ago, we were talking about from Bernini, the Italian sculptor, and his some of his sculptures, Daphne and Apollo, for example, right? In the Renaissance, they were revisiting a lot of Greek themes, whether it's Perseus, right? You have the famous sculpture of Perseus with the head of Medusa. That's in the middle of, you know, a square in Florence. The triumph of, I guess you could say, nobility and virtue over ugliness. So these themes are always, they can always be revisited. You know, we don't need to be modern, and being modern or contemporary doesn't mean throwing out the past and, you know, year zero. Basically, we're at year zero now. Everything has to be new. That's not really what creating original works is. So yeah, let's explore Shelley's Hymn to Intellectual Beauty. This is actually one he wrote when he was relatively young. I don't actually know how old he was. I remember reading, I think it's like 1819. I don't know when he was born, Shelley, but it was the same year that Keats wrote his odes. I believe it's around that year.
Well, if it's 1819, that would be the year before he died, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
So I can't be sure about that. He wrote this. I believe he was quite young. We'll see. He's stating his commitment here. I guess that's what we'll discover. Wow. So I just read it, and we'll I'm sure people have commentary and things to say.
All
so
right.
Hymn to Intellectual Beauty. The awful shadow of some unseen power floats, though unseen, among us, visiting this various world with his inconstant wing, as summer winds that creep from flower to flower, like moonbeams that behind some piny mountain shower It visits with inconstant glance each human heart and countenance, like hues and harmonies of evening, like clouds in starlight widely spread, like memory of music fled, like aught that for its grace may be dear, and yet dearer for its mystery. Spirit of beauty, that dost consecrate with thine own hues all thou dost shine upon of human thought or form, where art thou gone? Why dost thou pass away and leave our state, this dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate? Ask why the sunlight not forever weaves rainbows o'er yon mountain river, why aught should fail and fade that once is shown, why fear and dream and death and birth casts on the daylight of this earth such gloom, why man has such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope. No voice from some sublimer world hath ever to sage or poet these responses given. Therefore, the names of demon, ghost, and heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spells, whose uttered charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see, doubt, chance, and mutability. Thy light alone, like mist over mountains driven, or music by the night wind sent through the strings of some still instrument, or moonlight on a midnight stream, gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream. Love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds depart and come for some uncertain moments lent. Man were immortal and omnipotent. Didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm state within his heart? Thou, messenger of sympathies that wax and wane in lovers' eyes, thou, that to human thought art nourishment, like darkness to a dying flame, depart not as thy shadow came, depart not, lest the grave should be, like life and fear, a dark reality. While yet a boy I sought for ghosts, and sped through many a listening chamber, cave, and ruin, and starlight wood, with fearful steps pursuing hopes of high talk with the departed dead. I called on poisonous names with which our youth is fed. I was not heard. I saw them not. When musing deeply on the lot of life, at that sweet time when winds are wooing all vital things that wake to bring news of birds and blossoming, sudden thy shadow fell on me. I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy. I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Have I not kept the vow? With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now I call the fountains of 1,000 hours, each from his voiceless grave. They have in vision bowers of studious zeal or love's delight, outwatch with me the envious night. They know that never joy illumined my brow, unlinked with hope, that thou wouldst free this world from its dark slavery, that thou, O awful loveliness, wouldst give whatever these words cannot express. The day becomes more solemn and serene when noon is past. There is a harmony in autumn and a luster in its sky, which through the summer is not heard or seen, as if it could not be, as if it had not been. Thus let thy power, which like the truth of nature on my passive youth descended, to my onward life supply its calm, to one who worships thee, in every form containing thee, whom, spirit fair, thy spells did bind to fear himself and love all humankind.
That's beautiful. I was wondering if it's wise, Dave, do you think that for the first reading, because when reading something that's rather complex, nothing here was literal. Is it wise to maybe go through it a second time and think through and pause on some of the imagery that he's raising to think like, what is he thinking about? How do you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. Maybe if there's something that stuck out to people, right? You know, if there's anything that stuck out, people can mention it now, and then we can kind of look over the thing. I don't know if there's anything that, even if it's a question, you know, what's he talking about here? Or I just wanted to see in 1816, right? It was published in 1816, and he died.
Come on, I'll be right back.
Shelley died 1822. So, okay, 1860. He was a mature poet at this point, and yet still at the beginning of his life. I mean, he died when he was, I believe, 30. So if it was 1816, he was like 26. Not bad for 26. Did anybody have any thoughts? Otherwise, we can kind of go over it and maybe reflect on each stanza, see what he's doing.
Yeah, personally, I'm a fan of that one, just because, I mean, if anybody does have any thoughts, I don't want to stop them from contributing that, but there's a lot in that, and it's not clear what he's saying. So maybe it's best to do that second one.
Right. One hint or two.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the fact that he called it a hymn to intellectual beauty is worth noting. It's not like it's not just a hymn to beauty, right? He does qualify. He gives it a certain characteristic. I think that's something worth considering. Mm-hmm. And
so how would you define intellectual beauty?
Well, I guess that's what we have to figure out, right? That's how is he defining intellectual beauty in this poem? And there are a lot of clues, so maybe we can look over it again and see if anything resonates with that idea. I mean, it's the title of the poem, so it's not a bad starting point, first hypothesis to try and see what he's doing. So so the first stanza. The awful shadow of some unseen power floats though unseen among us, visiting this various world with his inconstant wing, the summer winds that creep from flower to flower. Like moonbeams that behind some piney mountain shower, it visits with inconstant glance each human heart and countenance. Like hues and harmonies of evening, like clouds and starlight widely spread, like memory of music fled, like aught, which is anything, that for its grace may be dear, and yet dearer for its mystery. First thing I notice here is sorry.
No, go ahead.
He's talking about something that keeps shifting and changing, right? It doesn't seem, you definitely can't tie it down, right? It's like, is beauty here? Is it in the flower? Is it in, the wind blowing through the trees? Or I guess the shivering leaves, right? That the wind is blowing through. Like, where is it exactly? And all the images that he's giving us in constant glance, each human heart, like hues of harmony in evening, like clouds and starlight widely spread, as summer winds that creep from flower to flower. I find that a very compelling image. So there's something there, but yet it seems can't quite tie it down. So then he says,
it's not purely like all obviously rosy and good. Like there's a lot of positive imagery there that we associate with positive emotions. But scroll up again. He uses the imagery of, or the wording is interesting, that he chooses of the awful shadow of some unseen power. and obviously awful is not a bad thing intrinsically, but it's still, it lends itself to a bit more gradation, right? From just being like flowers and butterflies and a wind, you know, like all of these positive images of some summer wind. But there's this, yeah, an interesting.
Well, I think he begins the poem with a bang, because just one word is in opposition to all the rest. And the one word is unseen power. And I want to come back to the title of the poem, okay, Intellectual Beauty. That word is, the word intellect is truly a very problematic word because intellect can be only the second epistemological station, or it can be something much higher, because the bang of the beginning of the poem is precisely to make the dialectical opposition between the eternal forms, and my hypothesis is that instead of using eidos or forms or eternal forms, Shelley is using unseen power, and that's the opposition between the eternal world of the forms, or of the intellect in this case, but with the capital I, the ideas, and the phenomenon reality of the sensible world, of the senses perceptions. And he gave many examples of beautiful sceneries or beautiful phenomena that are in opposition with unseen power.
Right. As even an additional counterpoint, these are all very fragile images, right? Flowers, you know, the wind blowing through delicate flowers, tiny mountain showers, starlight, memory of music fled. And yet he's talking about some awful shadow of some unseen power. Awful, I think, you know, a different word for great in some sense.
Yes. Awful here, I think, must be understood as awesome and not awful in our modern sense.
Yeah. Awe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Hence the mystery.
And there's a play of word because of course this poem is Platonic, but he used the awful shadow of some unseen power, because for Plato the phenomena are the shadows, and the eidos, the forms, are the abstract reality. But here, Shelley, being a poet, he's a play of concept and of ideas here, because he used shadow to qualify the unseen power, the eidos, the eternal forms.
Right.
Is that sort of like, also, would you say that memory is like the shadow of the actual music? Like that like music directly experienced is one thing, but then the memory of it is like a degree removed from the firsthand experience of the music as a living thing as it happened. Would that be sort of what you guys would be thinking too, or
I mean, yes,
that's
absolutely
with all the other metaphors and images as well.
Yeah, but I would like to come back to what Matt just said, okay? Because anamnesis, the process to remember the world of ideas, is at the center of Plato theories, okay? And theories here taken in the Greek sense of theoria, contemplation. Because once again, for Plato, we have to bring our soul to the level of theoria, to contemplation. And at that contemplative level precisely, you have a true direct perception of forms, of music, of whatever you want. And the other epistemological station under theoria are degraded memories of what has been perceived directly at theoria, which is the highest epistemological station. And the process to go back to theoria, or if you want educare, to bring forth what is within, is that process of remembering.
Yeah. And I mean,
anamnesis in Greek, of course.
Yeah, I think, yeah, let's add a stanza, because I feel like I see it. We're 9:30 and we could keep talking about this.
It's fine, yeah. I mean, there's no rush.
Let's but yeah, that's like you said, Quan. I mean, I think the idea that it's Platonic is key, right? Shelley is very much orientated towards defending and reviving the classical Greek tradition. So he knows that, just any direct empirical experience of the world is not the real world.
Yeah. I would just say on that note too, and I don't think we should rush through anything if we miss something of a, we should be willing to dwell on something if needed. But on that note, just the thing that struck me at the very end where he says that this thing we're searching for, that we're giving praise to, is dear, yet dearer for its mystery. So it's like, it in and of itself is beautiful, but the fact that there's a certain mystery associated with it also gives it higher value. And I was just thinking a little bit about what we've been saying about the change and no change concepts that occur in, even when he's saying, like in each one of the images that he paints. The one that jumped out the most to me was the hues and harmonies of evening, which you've got right there, right? Evening is one segment of a changing day, and according to the sunlight which is setting, the hues in the flowers and everything else will be very fleeting. They'll only be according, like the colors that we see them, according to that one moment.
Right.
Very different from every other gradient that they could be on the infinite spectrum of color through night and day. Same thing for the harmonies. The sounds that occur at night are different from the day, but the idea of harmony and color are still eternal concepts. So you got these very nice finite and infinite ideas counterposed really well, that again, he's balancing the change nicely, and I just really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. This is a thoroughly composed piece. He's definitely not just throwing imagery out there to make us a very modern or contemporary ideas feeling intensely, right? So that you're supposed to describe things in very vivid ways and take people there and make them feel all sorts of things. But Shelley's not, he's doing that, but that's not actually his goal, right? There's something lurking beneath all these images that he's presenting that are compelling our minds.
Yeah. And once again, as with all classical composition, the first segment will give everything that will be exposed in detail afterwards, okay? Because I tend to agree that we should not rush that first strophe.
Yeah, you're right.
Because if you, once again, I repeat in another way what I said 5 minutes ago, the first line is the awful shadow of some unseen power, the eidos, the eternal forms, and just 7 lines under that first line, you have each human heart maintenance. Okay, so each human heart, the heart is the third epistemological station. So he starts truly with a bang, speaking of the dialogue between different epistemological stations according to my understanding. And at the end, like memory of music, reminding us again that that journey of the soul is truly a journey to remember. And the last line of this first part, dear and yet dearer for its mystery. And it's truly dense, okay? And it's the first time I read this poem from Bysshe Shelley. And just part shows that he's an accomplished poet, okay? Because everything are in those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 first lines.
Right. I mean, I would even add, because you're right, dear and yet dearer for its mystery. I like the idea, and I mean, if we read the mystics or serious scientists, right, Hues and I mean, serious scientists. Planck talks about this, and Einstein, when he talks about wanting to know God's thoughts and that everything else is detail. What's often held up as science today, you know, the quote unquote facts they're just details, but the actual, what we really know, the only thing we really know are mysteries, right? Are paradoxes about the universe. As much as we try and explain, you know, the nature of the universe, its constant unfolding and development, its unboundedness. I mean, it contains everything, and yet nothing contains it technically, right? Or what's outside the universe. It's not a very obvious concept to wrap our heads around, and yet we live in the universe. And like, what is there anything outside the universe? How is that even possible? How can there be nothing outside the universe?
Well, you see that kind of interrogations or that kind of dialogue that you put yourself with us is precisely the epistemological endeavor of dialecticon, okay? Right. Playful exploration. As opposed, intellect with a capital I or ideas, dialecticon in theoria, as opposed to intellect with a small I, meaning that the conceptual mind that has to be developed, and inside the conceptual mind is possible to be comprehensive, but it's not the source of true knowledge.
Right.
And now truly a classical poem, definitely.
See where it goes.
So now he calls it spirit of beauty, that dost consecrate with thine own hues, all thou dost shine upon of human thought or form. Where art thou gone? Why dost thou pass away and leave our state? This dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate. Ask why the sunlight not forever weaves rainbows over yon mountain river. Why aught should fail and fade that once is shown. Why fear and dream and death and birth cast on the daylight of this earth such gloom. Why man has such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope. He's calling it a spirit now, right? I think I consider a principle, right? It's the way he's treating beauty. It's not, I guess, because we're so, what I hear in my head as the counters is beauty is just some ephemeral thing, right? And it's or it's just a question of taste, or it's ephemeral, it's sensual, right? Sensual beauty, it's like, it's pleasing. But by calling it a spirit, he's saying that it's its own thing. There's a one, right? There's a platonic one there. In the same way there's a justice, in the same way there's a truth. He's saying there's a beauty. It's not just like a taste thing or like a nice idea. He's saying it's a principle. There's an actual thing called beauty.
Well, he's alluding to a purpose to it, right? Because he's talking about it in its absence. He's asking, "Where art thou gone?" And he's alluding to things that you know. He's saying that this is something which has this power, with thine own hues all thou doth shine upon of human thought and form. So it's everywhere. It consecrates all these things. But where art thou gone? So it's absent. And why do you leave our state? This dim vast veil of tears, vacant and desolate. So its absence causes something to happen, which wouldn't be there if it wouldn't happen that way if it was always present. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Cast the daylight. Yes. Well, spirit of beauty is perfect because he's speaking, as you already said, about the eternal form of beauty. That's why spirit is there. And if you remember at the very end of the poem, he will repeat another time spirit of beauty, as if a kind of invocation.
It's like, wouldn't the universe be better if beauty was just always happening and rainbows were always present and light was always present? Why is there the absence of these good things?
Yes,
Right.
I would say that we have to see it at the level of the phenomena and at the same time at the level of the journey of the soul. Because when he repeat a second time at the end of the poem, spirit of beauty, as if he was invoking the appearance of that in us all, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I even just switching it up, replace beauty with goodness, right? With the good. Is the universe not characterized by, is there not a principle of good, eternal good in the universe? Is there not a principle of justice in the universe, right? Are these just conventions? Are they just man-made concepts, or is there actually something called justice? But then you get the boomer sort of response. Then, well, why are all these bad things, right? If there was really justice, or if like God was a truly good God, he would never allow all these things. So how can we be in a truly good universe, or how can human beings be truly good if all these bad things happen? I feel like there's the same epistemological problem.
Or I would say he was urging us to go on that travel, because precisely when we were speaking of Kairos and Tampus, the Kairos eruption in cross reality is our responsibility. If the universe is not as good as we hope for, there's a part that is from our own responsibility as spiritual species, if you want. And I don't know if it's allowed, but I would make. I would like to read the 7 last lines, because I think that's why I call that an invocation. Okay. Thus let thy power, which like the truth. Okay. He did not capitalize the word truth, but I would have capitalized that word. Of nature on my passive youth descended to my onward life supply. It's calm to one who worships thee, and every form containing thee. Okay, I would have capitalized the form. Whom spirit fair thy spell did bind, to fear himself and love all humankind. So in the last 7 lines, he was invoking the 3 major forms of truth, goodness, and beauty. Even if he did not use the word goodness, he used love instead of goodness. But that would be my understanding. He was invoking the avatara, okay, that those eternal forms would descend. And the word descend is used, okay, of nature on my passive youth, descended to my onward life supply, okay, which is a a more poetical way to say either those eternal forms descend on us or we go up to them. Okay, but I would say that it's equivalent.
But there's a paradox I feel like we're not dealing with, and I'm not always comfortable jumping to the end, to a punchline of a joke before we figured out the composition, but we did it. So anyway, when he says to fear himself and love all, he's contrasting two things here. When he's saying to fear himself, does he mean that the person who has gone through this journey, through this fire, has learned to fear himself, or is he? What is this thing he's fearing? What is it about himself that he is fearing, that such that he is able to love all humankind?
I think there's three things that he should fear.
Or is it too early to talk about
he
that?
should
Because
fear firstly,
skip so much.
Go on.
Oh no, it's not too early, because that's one interpretation, and another person could give another interpretation. That's the beauty of the classical poem. I would say that to fear himself, there are three things that he should fear. The animal dimensions in him, which is not transcended, if you want. That's one. But also the divine dimension that could be wasted because let's remember the guy going out of the cave. He could stay outside and not returning to the cave. Okay, and that's another fear. And the third fear would be, I should have mentioned the third fear as the second fear. Because if you remember the image of the Platonic cave, or the allegory of the cave, before going out to the sun of the absolute, there's a temptation. The last temptation is to join the people on the platforms and to play with the puppets to produce the shadow. Okay, that would be the second fear. And the last fear would not to return to the cave once you're outside.
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, I like what you just said, because that goes back to the second stanza we were just evaluating above, where he's talking about on the spirit of beauty, which in its absence, there's a variety of ways that the spirit of beauty is absent, and bad things, or so-called negative things that we don't like, happen. And he gives these examples of love, hate, despondency, and hope, which also causes pain. When we have hope that's disappointed, you're risking something and you could hurt, your soul could hurt. Fear, dreams, death, birth is pain as well. Fear is pain. Dreams could be painful sometimes. Death is certainly something that can cause pain. So all of these things are like not beautiful things, but they're necessary parts of our existence. And when we have temptation, we give ourselves over to things that ultimately cause pain in our conscience. Our soul is caught. We do self-damage, right, to our soul. So our own weaknesses, which could lead to this pain, a lot of it caused by our bad choices and stuff, or bad dreams as well, are often caused by bad consciences, right? The pain of death through the fear is often caused by an unresolved relationship one has with their mortality. All of these things are unharmonic inner turmoil that we have, caused by, again, corruption, like things that lead us to corruption, that cause pain to our soul, or ugliness to our soul, I guess, and our mind. So yeah, that we should fear those choices, in the sense that our corruptibility, which happens when we're what causes our corruptibility? Is it when we're humble and self-aware of the damage we could do to ourselves by misstepping, or is it when we're wise or is it when we're prideful and ignorant to the damage we do to ourselves? Obviously, it's the second one that usually occurs, right? So we're afraid of our pride. We're afraid of
right.
misstepping.
I was even thinking, I felt like I read something that there was a specific allusion that he was making, but because the idea is fear God, right? And thinking about the sort of religious environment that Shelley was in as well, right? Very sort of strict, dogmatic, very
Anglican.
Lots of formalism, no spirit, really, no love, really, right? It's like follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much, right, in with anything that becomes formalism, it's like morality becomes just a system of pain and reward, right? If you're a sinner, you're punished, and if you're good, you get goodies, right? And so the good people get goodies, and the bad ones are shamed. But then it's like, if that's all religion is, how is that really different from like a classical system of conditioning? How is that much different from Pavlov's system? And that's often how, even today, right? A lot of religious arguments are really just formalism, and it just comes down to reward and punishment, and threatening, eternal damnation if you're bad,
mm-hmm.
and heaven if you're good. But why are you really doing? Shouldn't you be wanting to do the good? Shouldn't you want to do these things? Right. And so I guess as an inversion, rather than fear God, right, which would have been more of the way to think about it, he's saying fear yourself. Be afraid that you don't actually rise up to that level, right? You were talking about it before, Quan, the intellect, and like fear that you don't actually strive for these things.
Mm-hmm.
You should be way more afraid of that. In a sense, it's more immediate.
Yes. Well, that's the first fear, to stay in the animal kingdom. And the animal kingdom, it's vitality, intellect with a small I, and the heart. And precisely, I think that to fear God is a very, very bad expression, because why should you fear beauty, goodness, and truth? And you're perfectly right, Dave. The fear is rather not to remember beauty, goodness, and truth, and to stay in the animal kingdom, which isn't wrong, but because there's nothing wrong to vitality, intellect, and the heart. But that would be a lower dimension of life, let's say. And the fear is precisely to miss the higher dimension of life. That's the first fear.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're really living just according to reward and punishment, right, choice between heaven and hell or whatnot, like if you're doing it based on that kind of system of conditioning, you probably shouldn't be going around shaming other people or telling other people what's right and what's wrong, right? Just like, it's basically, these are the hall monitors of the world. Like, you didn't do your homework, like that's not that's not how you make people good. That's not how you become good. Right. By sort of,
well, it's virtue signaling, right?
Absolutely. It's more gross in the sense because it takes the guise of virtue. Yeah. Right. It's self-righteousness. So you go around sort of shaming everybody.
But
pray for your neighbors and pray for your, all these sinners. But it's like, where is that really coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's coming from Callicles or Thomas Hobbes, which were at the top of the animal kingdom, the fake democratic man, motivated by the appearance of justice, okay? Because virtue signaling precisely is at that level, the appearance of justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, and it deprives you of being able to truly care about or have compassion and love for others, because you're prizing, your ego and is becoming more inflamed and more arrogant the more well-behaved you are, and you create this psychological elitism, this separateness of you and other, the bad, the sinner, the polluter or whatever, who just becomes a little bit psychologically uber or untermenschen.
Yeah.
you're obviously going to be, you might say
Untermenschen,
you all
that's it.
are alike, but really, no. It's another species that's lower than you at that point, and you can't really love humankind at that point either, as much as you might say the words.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
actually, I was actually thinking about this today, right? Because there's the great saying, right? Hate the sin, not the sinner. But you have a lot, usually often, right? You run into people, and they hate the sinner. Like, these people are degenerates. These people are degenerates. They're degenerates. And then you think about, well, who was Jesus really going to? Was he looking for all just he was dealing with people that were broken, right? That were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But the deeper truth, hate the sin, not the sinner. Because what about these people? They're sinners too, right? By their nature. So how can they love themselves if they haven't gotten to that level where they make the distinction between hating the sin and not the sinner? How can they really love themselves, because they sin too? Right? And
right.
so they just haven't gone that deep, right? They haven't. It's very externalized. They're sort of, the judgment is kind of, it's going one way. I guess.
Well, this is where you get, and I don't want to go too off topic, but this is where you get the self-flagellation of our modern society, of people who think that they need to suffer, they need to consume less, they need to eat bugs, and in order to, or let's say, cut off their genitalia in order to be androgynous or something like that, so that they don't poison the gene pool by procreating and contributing to overpopulation. It's like, these are not pleasant things. You don't do this for pleasure. You do this to have pain, to deprive yourself of something in order to be what you think of as good, but it's really carried by shame. Like, you feel like you're part of a human virus that's hurting Gaia. So ultimately, there's this shame factor ultimately governing all of these things you feel like you have to do to repent, but not really.
Right.
Yeah, but I would say that that's even more mechanical than that, because the people identifying themselves to the in-group are precisely answering to the need of the fake democratic man, inventing a classification. And as long as they satisfy to outer criteria to be part of the in-group, that's enough, okay? Because once again, that's the appearance of justice,
right,
and not justice.
That's the highest goal for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Why I insist on that? Because it's a very efficient method of ruling, unhappily, okay? And in all civilizations, there is always a group of theoreticians that would propose something at that level of the fake democratic man, and would propose a conventional truth or social truth that would make the difference between the obedient and the non-obedient, that Matt would call the untermenschen, with more intensity than me.
Mm-hmm.
So, stanza 3, right? It ended with why ought
reread that. Why ought? Yeah.
Why dost thou pass away and leave our state, this dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate? Ask why the sunlight, and he goes on.
No, read it.
Okay. Ask why the sunlight not forever weaves rainbows over yon mountain river. Why aught should fail and fade that once is shown. Why fear and dream and death and birth cast on the daylight of this earth such gloom. Why man is such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope. And now, right. Well, that's really telling, huh? Like, ask why. Well, why does man do all these other things that he does?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why is there no beauty? Well, ask why aren't people doing all sorts of good things that they could be doing. What's the deeper issue? So then, no voice from some sublimer world hath ever to sage or poet these responses given. Therefore the names of demon, ghost, and heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spells, whose utter charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see, doubt, chance, and mutability. Thy light alone, like mist over mountains driven, or music by the night wind sent through strings of some still instrument, or moonlight on a midnight stream, gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream.
Unquiet dream.
That is not clear. Said, no voice from some sublimer world hath ever to sage or poet these responses given. So now he's going to lay out these responses that no voice have from a sublimer world has ever given to a poet or a wise man, which follows. Therefore, the names of demon, ghost, and heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spells whose utter charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see, doubt, chance, and mutability. What is he talking about?
Well, I know that I'm a little bit obsessed by that, but he's talking about the journey of the soul. And I think here that when he said, no voice from some sublimer word hath ever to sage or poet these responses given, therefore the names of demon, ghost, and heaven. I think that he didn't really mean that no poet or sage were capable to remember the journey of the soul, but rather that the communication, the words used were not necessarily capable to convey what the poet lived inside. If the two last line in the thy lie alone like mist over mountains driven, and I go to the end, gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream. Okay, so that thy, is it God? Is it the absolute eternal force? Is it the soul striving to remember the pathway to beauty, goodness, and truth? I think we can give many answers here, but thy light alone like mist over mountains driven gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream. That's the core of the stanza, according to me.
Well, there's also the paradox too of the choice of using, there's like an ambiguity built into his composition at this point where he describes an unquiet dream, meaning a dream that has sound, but then he's referring to the music that is sent by the night wind through strings of some still instrument. How does a still instrument, a stringed instrument that is still not moving, make sound, right?
Well,
such that an unquiet dream is what is being evoked. So you got like something quiet causing something unquiet.
But the still instrument matter is the eternal form, okay? Because if the instrument is not still, it's a phenomenal instrument in this world. And through strings of some still instrument means that that's the voice of the eternal forms.
Right, and you're seeing it through the filter of something like even the moonlight on a midnight stream, you're not seeing the moonlight. You're not seeing the moon itself. You're seeing light on a midnight stream, which has a constant motion to it. There's a separation from the reality. It's like
absolutely,
a shadow.
Absolutely. And once again, I am expressing my admiration for that classical poem. But you see, you have one line is absolute reality, the other line is phenomenal reality, and after, okay, thy light alone, that's absolute reality.
Right.
Or music by the night wind sang, that's phenomenal reality. Through string of some steel instrument, that's absolute reality. Or moonlight on a mainstream, that phenomenal reality. And gives grace and truth, that's absolute reality. But giving gives grace and truth, that's absolute reality, nourishing phenomenal reality. Life's unquiet dream. It's simply incredible.
Right. And I mean, actually the image I like the most, and they're all compelling, it's mist over mountains driven, right? So the mists are fleeting again. So it's like, it's phenomenal reality. Thy light alone, right? Like mists over mountain driven. So that light is like mists over mountain driven, right? So it does seem to fade or pass, come and go, right? Blows through the strings of some still instrument, or reflects, on a starlit stream.
Yeah.
Gives grace and truth. Gives grace and truth to life's unquiet
dream. Wow.
And
I have a technical question. Okay, for those who knows better Shelley's biography than me, is there an absolute proof that he read Plato's dialogues?
Yeah, he translated. He even translated the Symposium.
Okay, perfect.
And the Ion.
Okay, so that's the absolute proof, because it's so Platonic that if he didn't read Plato's dialogues, he would be a.
Yeah, he'd be a. It'd be. It's like, no, you got that.
It would be. It would be even more grandiose if he did not read Plato's dialogues and produce that kind of poem.
And it dawned on me that when he's saying, describing no, my question mark is a little bit more resolved, ironically, in the ambiguity, where he says no sublimer voice to any sage or poet has ever said, right, demon, ghost, or heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. I think he means when he says frail spells whose uttered charm might not avail to sever doubt, chance, and mutability from all we hear and hear and see. So there's always this question of, like, a lot of people, they want to have a final answer, right? That's a closed, crystallized, Aristotelian answer to things, to all of the problems, and they will often make recourse to, like, why should you do good? Oh, because you'll go to heaven. That's why you should do good. That's the final answer. Or like, why did a bad thing happen? Well, a demon made me do it, or something. And it's like, this is like a final answer. And it's like, no, this is stupidity. If you think that that's a satisfying reason why you should do good or why a bad thing happened, you are really far off the mark. You are not wise, and you are no way going to be a qualified poet if you think in these overly simplistic terms, because there's always doubt, chance, and mutability, which is
right
openness to know something better. You can't ever crystallize truth in that sense.
Yeah. Or maybe the intellect with a capital I, as you just explained, Matt, and the intellect with a small I, that you can have a closed system into in a conceptual production, okay? But as long as you know that it's a conceptual production with specific definitions and a closed system because of those specific definitions, there's nothing wrong, okay? As long as you know that. A little bit like last time we discussed together, And I said that we have an automatic dimension in us, an animal dimension in us, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we don't close ourselves in that animal dimension.
Right.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add is I find that it right. He emphasizes mystery, right? And mystery is often treated as something less real, right? Less concrete, less tangible when we're thinking about truth than facts, right? Than quote unquote facts.
Exactly.
Here he's emphasizing that no, actually the mystery, that thing that seems to leave us with some doubt, chance, in a sense that everything is changing and there's nothing constant, or there's nothing more than all these fleeting images, right? It's there's a failure to really embrace the question of mystery as really, I mean, most fundamental, right? In science, it's actually, whether in art or science, the mystery is primary when we're talking about truth. We're pursuing something that we're never fully going to understand. You're going to get all sorts of facts. You're going to find out all sorts of things, but the ultimate truths that you're after will always remain a mystery per se, right? Like in Hues's terms, right? When he's talking about the idea of God, right? He has a great dialogue, on the unknown God, right? And he's just really, on learned ignorance, right? That the highest intellectual vision, right? That the purest light that you could see, the divine light, it's not going to be bright at all. It's actually going to be absolute darkness, because anything less than absolute darkness, right, it would be a light that can still become less bright or more bright. So it can't be the absolute light. So necessarily the absolute, this higher domain of knowledge, is imbued with mystery. You can't actually get away from it if you want to deal with these eternal paradoxes, these eternal truths.
Yeah. Well, it's this childlike quality of wonder that you always, like the real scientist always has access to and cherishes more than anything, more than their actual like earned knowledge. They cherish even more the wonder and awe of what they don't know, because real knowledge comes with humility. It doesn't create arrogance. Like fake knowledge creates arrogance about how much you know, and then you fall into the Schiller bread-fed scholar problem of wanting to like protect your model, your theory that you've gotten a claim or fame or a job with, more than the love of truth itself. Whereas when you have real truth, you're just reminded about how little you actually know, because you had to become aware of all of these points of ignorance you had inside of you that were preventing you from making the discovery in the first place. And just by doing that, it enhances your humility a lot more. And again, it's very much that childlike quality that all kids, they have no arrogant problem because they don't think they know everything already. So they have that spark that can be carried. It's good that be carried all the way into our later years, so we're constantly learning new things. And when that spark goes out, we can't learn anything new. We could just use memory if we're lucky.
Right. And I mean, it's almost a cliche, like the more you know, the less you know, right? I mean, that's kind of a cliche, but in the sense it's that, no, the more you actually know, the greater the sense of mystery and awe becomes.
Well, Socrates, right? Yeah.
That thing only becomes greater. That awe and appreciation for the ultimate mystery of the universe, it becomes great. It becomes clearer. It's actually the thing that becomes more, I don't want to say tangible, but it's the thing that becomes more clear in the mind, the more we know.
Yeah. In general, I have an idealistic standpoint, but I would like to maybe to bring a specific case of a scientist having career preoccupations, which are more in the animal kingdom, but at the same time having truly tasted the playful exploration of the epistemological station of dialecticon. Okay, I think that we all have to be aware of that dance between the animal dimension in us and the divine dimension in us. I think that it's very rare that you are either completely animal or completely divine. Our species has the very tragic incarnation of that double animal nature in cohabitation with the divine nature. Most of the scientists who succeed in their career, of course, are part of the establishment and so on. They have a career, they have ideas to protect and so on. That's the animal dimension. But I would say that if he truly brought some good ideas in the world of science, it's because he was in dialecticon sometime during his life. And to a certain stage of his life, sometimes the animal dimension wins, sometimes the divine dimension wins. And I think it reflects in reality the tragic existential human reality.
Absolutely. Well, I think we can all think back to our own personal lives at different times when we were doing better and doing worse. And I mean, I know myself, you know, there has been times in my life where I gave into things and you know, my creative powers were reduced, my ability to, you know, to do a variety of things that I valued highly were reduced. And certain times where you're getting better, where you're able to overcome the war of the flesh, so-called, you know, which, I mean, the flesh is supposed to not be warred upon. It's supposed to be something which we can enjoy the pleasure of the senses while at the same time enjoy the higher pleasures, but we should be able to, that's why we have to cultivate things like wisdom, temperance, all of those great virtues so that we can balance the two worlds in a harmonic way. Or otherwise you end up into some bad extremes.
Manichaean dichotomy, crazy
well,
dichotomy.
Yeah, like this Apollo Dionysius you know, division of the self that so much of society has been sort of schismed by, to be all like stoic and disciplinarian and self, you know, flatulating, to be dutiful and Kantian, versus the hedonistic, debauched revelry, you know, that to the degree that we allow the Dionysian Apollo dualism to shape us, we really can't be our true selves. Like we can't access those deeper powers.
I mean, ultimately, Shelley is acknowledging that, right? When he talks about doubt, chance, and mutability, but in reference to what we just said, I mean, at the end of the day, part of wisdom and humility is understanding, you know, as Kwan says, that we're navigating in the animal kingdom, right? That's why you need wisdom and humility, because you're still dealing in the quote unquote real world, the animal kingdom, the phenomenal world. And that Schiller says, right, temper the dreamer's zeal with worldliness, right? There's the idealist who lives just purely in the abstract, but they're always only going to be disappointed. Schiller talks about this in his on sentimental and ideal naive poetry, because the real world is not abstract forms. And he talks about how the idealist is actually the one, compared to the practical guy who just lives in a practical world and kind of has his routine, does his job, you know, meets his responsibilities, kind of follows everything. You know, you could say it's kind of, there's a formalism there, but that man is much less likely to stray, right? Like maybe, you know, he'll have a beer too many or something, you know, or he'll look at another woman, but he's relatively grounded Whereas the idealist, the pure idealist, right, who's just in these abstract forms, he's going to come to a point where he realizes that the real world doesn't actually live up to any of those pure, perfect abstractions that he's so enamored by. And Schiller just states outright that the fall for this person is infinite. There's no bottom, because they're well, I believe these things, but this isn't the world we live in.
Yeah.
And that's when it's all over, right? That's when it's like, because then they can do whatever, because, well, you know, they have these ideas, but the world's not like that. And so Shelley, you know, he's saying that this commitment or belief in of a spirit of beauty, I mean, it's challenged by doubt, chance, and mutability at every turn. But all the more that challenges you to actually, that means there's a need to go deeper. We're actually going to wrestle with intellectual beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should keep it going, but this is good. This is good.
Yeah, we're getting there. At the momentums, love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds depart and come, for some uncertain moments lent. Man were immortal and omnipotent. Didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm state within his heart? Thou messenger of sympathies that wax and wane in lovers' eyes, thou that to human thought art nourishment, like darkness to a dying flame, depart not as thy shadow came. Depart not, lest the grave should be like life and fear, a dark reality.
Let's just take a moment there.
He's in terms of classical composition, right? He's elaborating on the theme, right? I like the sonata idea, right? You have a statement and you have a restatement, and then you have or you have a statement, a counter statement, and then you have a restatement of the whole. There's many stanzas here, so he made that opening statement in the opening stanza, and then he starts introducing new variations and adding additional ideas, but he's echoing here, right? This is a variation echoing what we were just saying and what we're just reading. So love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds depart and come, for some uncertain moments lent. But then he asserts, man were immortal and omnipotent. Didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train. Thou is beauty, right? It's the spirit of beauty. So didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm state within his heart, the heart of man, as his love and his hope and his self-esteem, like clouds, they come and go.
Yeah.
So there's the change and there's the unchanging, right? There's that dance.
And if I may say so, I agree with Dave that it's a leitmotif, but at the same time, it's also a new theme, because when he wrote that man were immortal and omnipotent, this thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm within his heart. It's a call to the journey of the soul, precisely. And I think we about at the middle of the poem. So he began with a bang with the eternal forms and the phenomenal reality, and he developed on that. There's a certain repetition of leitmotif, but at the same time, the introduction of a new theme, but at the same time, a central theme.
Yeah.
Which is to remind the reader to start the journey of the soul, if not already done.
If it's not already begun.
Yeah.
Since it's never done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's the same, I completely agree, but there's the same counterpoint between the changing and the unchanging. And he's now adding more, he's just adding more to it and sort of throwing in man is immortal. Boom. There's a constant right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Surrounded by all these inconstants. And how do we wrestle with that?
Well, yeah, right. And it's the keep thy glorious train firm state within his heart. So you're always holding on to the ideal of the immortal and the omnipotent, but at the same time as you're aiming for it and yearning for it. I'm reminded of the symposium Socrates is offering at the symposium dialogue, where he redefines love from this yearning for the immortal standpoint. It allows you to keep the flame from dying, even though it won't always be bright. You're always going to have mutability. You'll always have shadows, but you're always aiming for depart not. Yeah.
Well, here I think that the chosen word is perfect. Okay, with thy glorious train firm stay within his heart. Because once again, psychology, true psychology, is the science to bring the psyche, the inchoate soul, to be the complete soul. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. So, and that is precisely the transition between the animal kingdom, the heart at the top of the animal kingdom, and the soul, which is the first level of the divine kingdom.
Yeah.
And thou, that to human thought are nourishment, incredible. Okay, you remember Dianoa A and Dianoa B? Dianoa A meaning mathematical forms, but Dianoa B, true beauty and true art. Thou, beauty, that to human thought are nourishment, lightness to a dying flame. And that is precisely that transition, which is very fragile and very difficult.
Yeah. And this question of depart not, again, is vital, because it's like, what is the thing that he's saying, depart not, lest the grave should be like life and fear a dark reality? It's the yearning for the immortal and the omnipotent, that for that higher level of truth. When you lose that that thing you're aiming for, then it's tragic. Then essentially
yes,
an early death.
Reality.
Yeah.
Or yes, well, according to the teaching of all spiritualities and philosophy, the true death is to remain confined to the animal kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that paragraph is precisely on the call to go to the divine kingdom, and exactly at the top of the animal kingdom, the psyche, and the first rung or the first level of the divine kingdom, the soul. Perfect classical composition.
And I would just add that, because if you're just in the animal kingdom, right, the person who lacks the epistemological development and wisdom, or the cynical boomer type, bad things happen. Oh, the world is bad, right? Things go wrong, right? Or tragedies happen, right? And suddenly people lose their faith, right? Or even let's say, I mean, there was a movie From Dusk Till Dawn. Second half was really weird, but the first half was quite interesting and very well done, with Quentin Tarantino. But it's the preacher man, and his wife died of cancer, and guess what? Doesn't believe in God anymore. Then they encounter vampires, and his mind starts to change a bit. It's fun, but if you're in the animal kingdom, right? As soon as you're hit, especially with serious tragedies, all of a sudden, oh well, it can't be a good world, right? Because all these things have the things around me have changed. All these nice things that I used to have that I was so happy about, now they're gone. So now, you know, I know that the world's actually not good. It's not beautiful, right? And there's a total lack of spiritual, epistemological, and philosophical development there. And I mean, so many people fall prey to this, and we all do at different times. But all the more, I think Shelley is sort of imploring us or encouraging us that, well, number one, it's a mystery, right? We're never going to fully get there. So it's not like this is about getting some final answer. But in a sense, there is a quality of practice, right? A question of pursuit. It's not something, you don't just pursue truth, then you found it and then you're done and you go home and, you know, it's over, right? That thing called truth is that thing that you're technically pursuing every day. That's always going to be out of reach, but that you're always getting closer to.
Yeah,
it's an eternal mystery, and it's that hunger, right? It's that thirst, it's that longing. That's actually the substance of it. Like that's you're always supposed to have that. That's not supposed to go away. It's when that goes away that, you know, something's gone wrong. And hence, you know, I was listening to Tim Dillon. He was talking about the boomers. I'm always now I'm hooked on bashing boomers, but, you know, bless their hearts. But he was saying the boomers were hippies. We're going to change the world. Fast forward, it's all over. He's like, wait, now we have to get a job. Like, we just have to, you know, 9 to 5, and like, we have to like pay bills now and all this stuff. Like, there's just this total shift, and it just broke it broke a generation. It just broke so many people. But there was no longer that pursuit, right? Or it was never rooted in it was never properly rooted, right? So that longing, that thirst, which is supposed to be eternal, it went away as the times or the conditions changed.
Yeah.
Shelley's warning against that.
Yeah. But I would like to maybe to run to the rescue of the boomers a little bit,
Sure.
Okay? Because they are the first generations in all mankind's history that the ordinary guy, not born in the upper bourgeoisie, was given the possibility to be a powerful animal. And the temptation was so strong, and I understand that generation, okay, in the West. That generation in the West has been the first group of human beings to which the possibility to be not at the level of the plutocrats, of course, but something resembling to the pleasure that the plutocrats can have. And that temptation was so strong for the ordinary guy not born in the upper bourgeoisie to run after owns those things, yeah, making him a powerful animal, meaning enjoying the vitality of the sense perceptions of the intellect and of the heart, that it would have taken man with philosophical proclivities to be capable to resist to such an offer and temptation.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's now a good lesson. It's a cautionary tale at this point for our generations. All the more Shelley's relevance. So the next, okay, now we're almost at the end here, so we can sort of, yeah, we're good momentum. While yet a boy, I sought for ghosts, and sped through many a listening chamber, cave and ruin, in starlight wood, with fearful steps pursuing hopes of high talk with the departed dead. I called on poisonous names with which our youth is fed. I was not heard. I saw them not. When musing deeply on the lot of life, at that sweet time when winds are wooing all vital things that wake to bring news of birds and blossoming, sudden, thy shadow fell on me. I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy. I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Have I not kept the vow? With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now I call the fountains of 1,000 hours, each from his voiceless grave. They have envisioned bowers of studious zeal, or love's delight, outwatched with me the envious night. They know that never joy illumed my brow, unlinked with hope that thou wouldst free this world from its dark slavery. That thou, O awful loveliness, wouldst give whatever these words cannot express.
Yeah.
Do I throw in the next? Or?
What should we do?
Well,
should we wait? Should we?
no, I think
There's a
that
contrast.
I think
two things there, right? Like two big.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Let's
And
look at those.
And the other stanza was the reminder to start or to keep on the epistemological journey. But those two stanzas are precisely development on that journey of the soul.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's like the practical example of now this is what it looked like in my life.
Right.
From a child seeking it out falsely, you know, with the romantic, childlike ideas of spirituality. And as you matured, how these ideas also changed.
Yeah.
You know, all kids like ghost stories. We all get a little bit, you know, he's like really into these myths.
Or even
for talking with the departed dead, literally, like he's more of a literal seeker of ghosts. But that didn't get him anywhere until he shifted his thinking.
Yeah. And just listen to that line. I called on poisonous names with which our youth is fed.
Yeah, that's the one that stands out.
Yeah, it's once again awesome.
I don't know for sure who he's talking about, but given the times and what we know, what I think of is, you know, in terms of the fake spirituality, or people are usually calling out to God when they need something, right? Like their idea of spirituality is sort of reaching out to a higher power when things aren't going well, right? And, you know, for all the people cruising through life, they're always good. And, you know, then you have the midlife crises, or, you know, the 50-year-old lady who's not like the super desirable, you know, young lady that she was, where everything was so great. And all of a sudden these people become spiritual, or, you know, in even in naive or younger times, right? There's this idea of hoping, calling out to, you know, some spirit or higher power to sort of guide them. I don't know that that's what he's referring to, but, you know,
well, there's definitely a shift when he says, you know, like I was heard not, I saw them not. Like it wasn't working as much as he was trying in that first 6 lines to pursue whatever he thought of as being spirituality. It just wasn't working. And then he shifts gears when musing deeply on the lot of life at that sweet time when winds are wooing and all things that wake to bring news of birds and blossoming. Sudden thy shadow fell on me. I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy. So there was like this realization that occurred. It's interesting that he calls it a shadow fell on me, you would think the light fell on me, but he calls it the shadow fell on me, which is interesting choice. And it's a new idea now arises that he didn't have before.
Yeah, but poetically, when we use the word shadow, we can understand shadow as your influence fell on me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's at the timing of it, right? It comes to him just as, well, he says, well, yet I was in the past, he had tried these things and it hadn't worked. And it was at a certain point where he had exhausted, right, a certain mode or approach, that something new found him, right? So it found him at a time where he had sort of tried these other things.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in that I was reading, there's this great book I have, and there's a part on C.S. Lewis, and he talks about how, well, he cites Augustine, who says, "But God gives," says Augustine, "where he finds empty hands. A man whose hands are full of parcels," adds Lewis, "cannot receive a gift." Right. And so that there's this sense that Shelley, it's at that moment where you are sort of open enough or emptied out enough of all your misconceptions, right, that you recognize they don't work, that you're actually become capable of receiving something, which you can't if your mind is crowded with all sorts of, wishy-washy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy that you said that wishy-washy stuff, because the names, the poisonous names with which our youth is fed, could be the different narrative from a dominant culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just as relevant today. The names could be completely different then and now, and it's relevant, right?
Exactly, because a name is a very good word, because we use name to label things and people. Okay, so those names, once again, we go back to the fake democratic man at the top of the animal kingdom, using labeling and given names to rule.
Yeah.
And the only way to get out of that is precisely as he wrote, "Sudden thy shadow fell on me, I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy." There is no other way. There's no alternative, TINA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A little Margaret Thatcher there.
And that's another Tina.
But yeah, and it's always a fun minor sudden. These things often happen suddenly, right? Right. These truths, when there's a discovery, right? There's often, this idea of like a gradual progression, but oftentimes great truths, right? They find us, and it happens very quickly. And in many cases, I guess the real question isn't that they weren't there before, or it's that when they do come, are we capable of receiving them?
Yeah.
I'm sure plenty of people have had the chance to learn great lessons and they just didn't. It's not like it didn't happen, but
he gave the answer on the first line. Unseen power.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know for myself, usually, like when I'm trying to come to, I'm straining to try to pursue an idea that I want to know. I want to and whether it's in geometry or like you're just trying to solve a problem, and it's usually when you shift gears, like you stop looking at the problem and you just think about an element that isn't directly related to that particular problem, that the key to solving that problem that you were hunting for often arises. Whether it's a history, like a problem in history that you're trying to piece together, and it's like taking a step back and looking elsewhere than, the particular domain. I was thinking about, just quickly, Canada, like I was trying to unlock some paradoxes about the Canadian situation in our past. And it was only when I took a step back and I looked at the United States that things became more evident in Canada, and
Right.
And how that. So anyway, this idea of him just thinking and letting his mind just play a little bit, allowed this eureka. The environment became ripe for this eureka to hit him. like you said, Dave, instead of him seeking out the eureka, it came to him, and he was now in the right place to allow it to resonate.
Yeah. There's a classical. Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just that's really the art, right? It's like knowing to not chase after things per se, right? And becoming more wise and used to the idea that we have to let these things sort of find us, but that itself is a whole art of being capable of receiving, right? The lessons that are offered to us, right? Or being aware enough to, see when it's there, as opposed to having our attention, fixed on some fixed point, and which point the things it's not gonna hit you. You're not, it's not gonna find you, because you're fixed on this thing that you've decided is the thing already.
It's hard to put it in words. It's yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not we shouldn't try to put it into words too much, I think, but
I agree.
Because it's
but once again, pictorial art sometimes can give you an exit for those things.
Yeah.
There's because we were speaking of art and of beauty. There's a classical French painter called Bouguereau, William Adolphe Bouguereau, who painted in the 19th century something called the rapture of psyche by love.
Okay.
L'enlèvement de psyché par l'amour. And that painting reflected precisely that transition from psyche to the soul, which is precisely going from the top of the animal kingdom to the first level of the divine kingdom. And going back to what we discussed since the last 15 minutes, that when you are in the conceptual brain of the animal kingdom, you can force things, okay? You can have drills, you can have exercises and so on. And if you are doing them seriously, you will get results inside that box. But if you want to go higher, you have to learn to be raptured, to receive rather than to force things. And that painting, La psyché enlevée par l'amour, is precisely that artistic representation of that transition from the psyche to the soul.
Yeah, and I mean, well, the Greeks had the Muses, right? That was their that.
Yes, exactly.
What are the Muses? Is it the poet deciding he's going to write on this topic? No, it's allowing the muse to sort of come to you and to worship it and to honor it and to do everything you can to sort of transmit whatever it is that the muse is communicating to you.
I like Bouguereau's Song of the Angels, with the three angels playing the violin and different instruments to a super beautiful baby, which I guess is supposed to be Jesus and his mom sleeping. Super nice.
So that's our homework, Bouguereau.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Wait a minute. I can just do this. 1 second. Okay. I realized I've got the power. 1 second.
Yeah, my computer's slow. So
check this out. I got it. Share screen. There you go. That's a nice thing. As far as like,
there we go.
You guys see that?
Yeah. Oh wow, that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
In terms of just the music subtly just shaping our soul when we're definitely the logical side of it is removed twofold, both because it's a baby and babies don't have much of a logical identity, and two, it's sleeping. But still it's being influenced. It's nice. Especially considering the idea of Christ as well, and knowing the story that goes with it, with the type of wisdom and life that he leads. It's a pretty potent painting. I like it.
Yeah.
It's good.
And you have too La psyché enlevée par l'amour too.
No, this is not your rapture. This is not the one you were talking about, is it?
Yes. No. the one at the upper corner. Well, you have many rendition, but yes, it's that one. La psyché enlevée par l'amour. So the woman is the psyche, and the angel is love, or if you prefer, the first level of the divine kingdom.
Because she seems to be a little bit more like they have two different states of mind being expressed in their dispositions.
Right. This is the merging of the heart with the mind, correct?
Exact. C'est la psyché enlevée par l'amour, exact. And the woman seems to be more representing the psyche, the inchoate soul, so having a more passive attitude, and the soul having a more active attitude, okay? Of course, it's a symbolic representation of two different states of the same mind, of course.
Interesting. Cool. Dave, you want to do a screen share again?
Yeah. Okay. So
let's wrap it up. I think we can. Yeah, we should.
Yeah, we'll take her home.
Yeah. This is good. This is a great exercise. I'm really happy we're doing this today.
I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Oh, I read that. The day becomes more solemn.
Oh, no. Read that previous one and then we'll move on to the law.
I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Have I not kept the vow? With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now, I call the fountains of 1,000 hours, each from his voiceless grave. They have envisioned bowers of studious zeal, or love's delight, outwatch with me the envious night. They know that never joy illumined my brow, unlinked with hope, that thou wouldst free this world from its dark slavery, that thou, O awful loveliness, wouldst give whatever these words cannot express. Again, tension with the inexpressible, right? We're trying to talk about something that cannot be put into words. Does that mean it's not real? I mean, that's one paradox.
I was also thinking about what is when he says that I've dedicated my powers to thee, with beating heart and streaming eyes, even now I call the phantoms of 1,000 hours, each from his voiceless grave they have envisioned. So anyway, I was just thinking, what are these phantoms of 1,000 hours that are so potent and that are actually, he's now on something which really works. He's made his discovery and he's devoted himself to this hope and this way of thinking and feeling. I don't know if there's a crystallized answer available for that. I was thinking maybe was it the different souls of different minds he's read, because he's obviously read Plato, all of these dead people who are speaking to him, that he loves, Cicero and others, that he's a very studious guy. Or is it a more figurative term when he says the phantoms of 1,000 hours?
I think he's speaking to the immortals, right?
Immortals, right? That's what I was thinking too.
The manifestations of this spirit of beauty across all time, and that he's there and he's present in a sense. They're present with him, right? So this is no longer Tempos or Chronos. I guess it is Kairos in a sense, right?
Well,
it's an eternal level.
Well, it's Kairos because he was capable to link tempos. I would say that I agree with Matt, but I would say that the Phantoms of 1,000 hours can have two interpretations, linking Chronos and tempos, okay? Once, the Kairos is the channel between timelessness and time.
Yeah. So
the Kairos is his own journey of the soul, or his own epistemological journey. The phantoms of 1,000 hours can be in tempus, meaning in timelessness. And in that sense, I agree with the Matt's interpretation. But I would say that at the same time, the phantoms of 1,000 hours can also be in chronos, meaning the mass of his personality he learned to transform, okay, to make them go through a process of transmutation when he is inspired by, on the one side, the phantoms of 1,000 hours, who are those immortal spirits living in timelessness.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have the phantoms of 1,000 hours coming from his own chronological life, okay? His personas, the mass that he has accumulated during his chronological life or his temporal life. And the kairos is the channel that put together those two kinds of phantoms of 1,000 hours. On the one side, those living in timelessness, and on the other side, the social mass that he accumulated with time in his chronological life.
So, the day becomes more solemn and serene when noon is past. There is a harmony in autumn and a luster in its sky, which through the summer is not heard or seen, as if it could not be, as if it had not been. Thus, let thy power, which like the truth of nature on my passive youth descended, to my onward life supply its calm, to one who worships thee, and every form containing thee, whom spirit fair, thy spells did bind to fear himself, and love all humankind.
Wow. Wow. That changes. That changes how I would normally think about this quite a bit.
The first thing that this is where the clue of intellectual beauty, to now having gone to the poem answer Kelly's question, or as a first as a response, he says, thus let thy power, which like the truth of nature on my passive, the truth of nature on my passive youth descended. I think of that as like a romantic kind of beauty, right? A Wordsworthian sort of like love of nature, the beauty of nature. Yeah, you know, the mountains, they're nice, and the fields, it's all very pretty and beautiful. But then, right, he's talking about intellectual beauty, which is definitely not a romantic ideal, right, of beauty. It's not this idyllic natural beauty as such. It's something, it's different, right? It's qualitatively higher. And so I feel like he's reflecting on this earlier form of beauty that he had known. And now he's saying, in the same way that this thing captivated me, to my onward life supply its calm. So I feel there's the counterpoint between these two different kind of beauties.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, we maybe have a very classical metaphor. When noon is past, meaning the midday, that would maybe can be understood as a metaphor for a mature mind. And there's harmony in autumn and a luster in its sky. Autumn too, okay, expand to a man's maturity in his life, okay? Spring being youth, summer, well, spring being childhood, let's say, summer being the first stage of adulthood, and autumn would be, it's almost Confucian, okay? Like when Confucius said at 15, at 30, at 40, at 50, at 60, at 70.
When our wisdom starts to blossom and we can start trusting our hearts more.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a luster in the sky, okay? There's a light from the divine kingdom, which through the summer is not heard or seen, okay? In the first stage of youth. And if it could not be, as if it had not been.
Right.
And after, yes, and well, that's quite obvious, because those are the classical metaphors used to define the stages of a man's life.
And at the same time, well, that's the beauty, right? When we were talking about, I was talking about the idea of classical and timelessness. Like, summer and autumn. I mean, this isn't a new theme, right? As Kwan said, I mean, you can go back pretty far. But Shelley he's taking these themes and he's doing something, quite amazing and transformational with them, which is what great artists do.
Yes. And maybe I would like to make a comment too on classical art, okay? Because we often say that we can offer different interpretations, but with a classical piece of art, of classical text, and there are not many interpretations. There is one main interpretation, because there's only one truth. We can have variants, but variants are not different answers. It's the same answer expressed differently.
Well, I think that's the beauty of the differentiation, the difference of all of us, because we're all different people with our own subjective experiences that are coming to the same experience together right now. With Shelley, who's been dead for a long time physically, but in many ways we have to ask, is he really dead, from the sense that we're talking here, right? Did he achieve immortality? Since we're all sort of awakening something of his essence by reviving his line of thinking, his idea that was alive in him, that he wrote, which animated his choice of metaphor, his choice of composition, that's now alive. And so that's unique, but at the same time, it's the same. So that's I think something, again, Kwan, like you said, with all classical characteristics of classical art, you have this quality about it where it's ours, it's subjectively ours, our personal idea and discovery of, or rediscovery of Shelley's idea.
And I would just say it's it's infinite in its richness, right? Like we and especially if you add in how each individual will themselves have their own unique way of identifying with these eternal truths, right? In terms of reflecting on their own lives. So in this, the richness is infinite, right? But it's like the absolute one. There's a one that is always there. That doesn't change.
Yeah.
But our ability to unearth new things or revisit this poem, right, at different periods in our lives, it's gonna add. We're gonna find different things, or different things are going to speak to us in ways that they didn't before, or something else will stand out that before we passed over. It's infinite. It's got infinite depth.
I would like to add where Dave said reflection on our own lives, that reflection and self-examination have a big part to play in our development of these qualities of temperance, wisdom, humility, because in pursuit of living a virtuous life, we need to self-examine our intentions on why are we in this pursuit. Is it for the love of goodness, or maybe fear of punishment, or for praise from others? To find the real underlying reason of why we are pursuing virtue, which should be the love of goodness. and truth and beauty. So yeah, so self-examination and reflection on one's own self and actions and intentions plays a vital role in cultivating these good qualities.
In a sense, that's itself is a lifelong journey, right? I mean, if we're being honest, like the human individual is vast. I mean, it's infinite. The soul is infinite in its depth. We should never stop learning things about ourselves, right? Or even if it means how we deal with other people, or the sage that takes on a pupil, technically, is he not going to learn more through having to deal with this other unique individual, which is its own soul? And how is your own soul going to converse and communicate with that? There's always a quality of self-reflection that doesn't go away. It's not like he's like a supercomputer that just has all the answers now, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I second that.
Yeah. Maybe a comment coming from my professional bias, okay? I said maybe half an hour ago that we are always in movement between the animal kingdoms and the divine kingdom anyway. And often in psychotherapy, there's not a definite answer to a psychotherapy, but rather the capability to maintain self-reflection in almost all situations. Meaning that if it can be seen as a final answer, I mean, there are elements. When I said 15 minutes ago that the phantoms of 1,000 hours are from the tempus dimensions, but also from the chronos dimensions, maybe at the center is that mirror, making us capable to see which kind of phantoms appearing in front of us, because those things are never finished. And what might be seen as a kind of final answer with inverted commas are precisely that capability to maintain a self-reflection in as many situations as possible.
I mean, I like that. That's the final answer. It's always going to be self-reflection. It's never not going to be part of the solution.
Or at least a vital part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Because someone who might seems very advanced on the journey of the soul might still have some skeletons in his inner soul, which could appear at a very unsuspected moment.
And I mean, this is where I feel the meek shall inherit the earth, right? This is where the Christian teachings are very good. It's when people are in the apex of their powers, right? Or they're in the animal kingdom, let's say, or like you've achieved everything, quote unquote everything, but then that moment that you do let your guard down is when you can make the greatest mistake, even with like a flawless track record, right? Like an undefeated champion or whatever, an undefeated boxer, right? It's that moment of pride that then it's like it's all gone. So it's not like that ever goes away. If anything, the most powerful or the let's say the most gifted, or they should potentially be the most humble, because the room for error is much greater than it is for just the everyday man who just has a more minor role to fill. I mean, if he makes a mistake, it's not the end of the world. But if you're the head of a nation, and if Xi Jinping makes like a mistake, I mean, that's a problem. But
Yes.
I saw a conversation with his mom, and she told him, make sure to honor your filial piety. He didn't go see her for Mother's Day. She said, do your work. And she said, don't make mistakes. That's what I found interesting. Like, as the mom, like, she's like, do your work, don't make any mistakes. That was her main takeaway.
Well, I feel like to quote someone that I don't want to quote, but I won't name him. He said, don't do anything stupid.
I don't know who said that.
Okay. When we would see each other eyes to eyes, I wouldn't give you his name because I don't want to name his name.
That's okay.
But even a non-interesting man sometimes can have good moments, and definitely don't do stupid things is a very good advice.
Right. And even the smartest of people can do stupid things.
Absolutely.
It's the humbling takeaway there.
Well, this was a very humbling and intellectually gratifying experience, guys. There was a lot of intellectual beauty this evening, and I hope that people listening on YouTube feel the same way. So this is a little bit longer than the 1 hour I expected, but it was really worth it. Really, we should do this more often. And I think it, from my standpoint, having studied in arts, illustration, fine arts, we're taught to bullshit a lot in university when it comes to the arts. And the idea of what one habit that I had to spend a lot of time breaking out of was the idea of looking, well, whether it's for painting or whether you're trying to interpret some whatever, right? What modern poetry, modern painting, whatever, you're looking for symbolism, and you're trying to sound smart, commenting intellectually on what meaning you think each little symbolic word or color or splattering of paint represents. And the more you can bullshit and infuse meaning into it, even including the painter, right? The more you're respected, even though it's really just a bunch of splatterings of paint at the end of the day. And with a real classical paint, like real art, should contain within it the seeds for its own discovery of what it means, but without being literal, right? So every metaphor, everything is placed to have the energy to awaken the idea that gave birth to it within the painting itself. So Shakespeare's writing should speak for itself. You should find Shakespeare's mind and soul in the words of the characters that he placed on the stage. You shouldn't have to listen to an intellectual telling you how to think about something. Same thing for a great piece of poetry. And I think that this was a great example of that. Really, really was. So
amen.
Next week, I don't know what we'll do. We'll come up with something fun to read. Whether another poem or whether we go into another essay, I'm thinking an essay might be worthwhile. We'll discuss and come up with something soon. And this Sunday, we have Alex Craner, who will do a geopolitical update with a little bit of history as well intact at 2 p.m. Sunday. So that'll be fun.
Excellent.
All right, guys.
Sounds good.
Sure.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye, Kelly.
Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan.
Bye. Bye.